Alrighty, let's get started. We're going to refactor this code, and it's going to be, quite a bit fewer lines of code, and it just makes a little bit more sense to use a timeline for this, in my opinion. So, one thing about this though, when you use the timeline, we're kind of set with a specific scroll trigger that will apply to all of the animations here. You could, I think, perhaps possibly overwrite those with its own scroll trigger. But anyhow, let's just go ahead and just delete everything from the previous lesson. All right, and we're going to define a timeline right here. All right, so I'm going to zoom up, get rid of our sidebar, and we're going to say let timeline equals gsap.timeline. And inside of here, we're going to have a defaults of, remember, ease. We want none for this when it comes to these scrolling elements here. And then we also want to put in a scroll trigger. So scroll, here, let's hit enter. Scroll trigger. And inside of here, the trigger is going to be the slider, just like before. Pin will be true, scrub will be 1. And then the end value is going to be plus equals slider offset width. Now this timeline in and of itself right now does nothing. So what we want to do is, just like before, we're going to iterate over each of our sections. So sections.for each. And this time we're just going to, you can call this section, I'm going to call it a stop, and then an index, oh, sorry about that, stop. And we need the index this time as well. All right, and you'll see why we need that index for the array. And so essentially, we're going to start our first timeline animation with a toCall. All right, and the first one is going to be the part that handles the horizontal scrolling. Because remember before, we had that as its own animation as I think it was the to method. So for us, we're just going to take and we're going to make the first toCall that's a part of our timeline animation to sections. And inside of here, X%. This time it looks slightly different. It's going to be negative, and then we're going to wrap this in parentheses. And we multiply it by the index value that we gain right here. All right. The duration, we're going to have a duration value, and this is going to be tied to index as well. And if you were to console log this, console log, for instance, index, like that, it would say 0, 1, 2, because we just have 3 sections. So that's what these are basically, this is how they're dynamic. Additionally, we're going to have a scroll trigger on this one. And we're going to say snap 1, and then sections.length -1, which is what we were doing before. And we want that specific scroll trigger property. It's not up here, but we want it to apply here to this call specifically because this is handling the scrolling portion, which we do want to have a snap onto that. Okay, so now if we save this, we should get our, oh, I have to go live first. 1 second. All right, so port 5500. All right, so it's actually not working yet. Don't worry, when we fill this out, it's gonna start to work better. Right now it's scrolling, but nothing is changing, unfortunately, at this point in time, but we'll get that worked out. So now what I wanna do is I wanna take a look at my reference code real quickly. I'm fairly certain everything's set up. One thing I do want to put is, this might be one of the issues, is just to put the offset value to start instantly. It's still not working. I'm fairly certain it's something I'm just missing, but we'll get to that. Let's do a call to our progress bar, and we'll see if this works. Otherwise, I'm going to have to pause and figure out why the scrolling sections aren't yet working. Don't worry about that. It's not a huge deal. Scale 1. And then scroll trigger. All right, now this part's cool. We're going to use a scrub for this, and we're just going to set it to 0.33. and that will make our intersection work. All right, so if you had this at scrub 1, and because we're iterating over each section, if we left this just at a default value of 1, for instance, it would the progress bar would complete after the first slide has entered or exited. So we don't want that. We have 3 slides. That's why we're putting at 0.33. All right, so yeah, it is working here, but our sections aren't scrolling, and I know it's just something stupid that I'm missing. I'm gonna pause real quick. And my suspicions are confirmed. We just need to keep on building out this animation sequence for them to start working correctly. So yeah, let's go ahead and add another one. For these, I'm not gonna sit there typing out from scratch. We're just gonna use the from method for this one. And this one, we need to scope, the individual elements that are part of each section. So we're gonna get, we call this stop, or this is the section itself. Query selector H1, Y%135. I did have a stagger because I was experimenting with split type. I decided not to use split type, so I'm gonna remove that. And then we have an ease that we can overwrite from the default up here, which is none. All right, so let's save that and refresh. Oh, okay, it's working now. There we go. Almost kind of working, but not quite. I'm not too worried about it. It's not going all the way to the end. We're also gonna add, for a paragraph, here's our paragraph selector, Y%50, opacity 0. There we go. Almost kind of working. It's we're offset just a bit here. We're also gonna have our image. Again, fairly straightforward. What's funny is this. I just noticed our stop selector paragraph in image has the opacity. Okay, so this was Y% and this is Y. I was gonna say to add these in an array. That way we could simplify the both these selectors into one call, but it is slightly different values because I'm using Y% and Y here. No big deal. And then after that, we're gonna change the body background color. Background color stop data, we already talked about that essentially. And then the last call is another from method from our right call selector for the right column, scale Y, transform origin bottom, and that's it. So let's save this. I'm gonna refresh. There's our first, there's our second, and there's our third. So as you can see, when recreating these animations, sometimes your different calls here can affect the overall progress, and kind of recreating it after the fact as I did here, and then trying to demonstrate it line by line, it can kind of appear like it's not working correctly. But when you start adding these and experimenting with the different animations, you'll eventually get there. And so the benefit to this code right here is it's definitely simplified compared to the previous version where we didn't use a timeline at all. But hopefully you understand for these horizontal scrollers, now you should have a pretty good understanding of how to set it up. We get our sections and then we scope each element that we want to animate within those sections. And of course, your slider setup from an HTML and CSS perspective, you want to make sure for your horizontal sections it's wrapped in a container that has display flex so that they're in columns. And then also the width of the container, in our case, the slider element right here, is going to be the full width of however long you want that element to be to slide or whatever. In our case, we use 300% because each slide is 100 viewport width essentially. And yeah, that's basically it. We're going to keep on experimenting here with more advanced front end techniques.